In the age of constant noise, where every second is filled with commentary, opinions, analysis, and reaction, we forget that the deepest truths are not spoken, they are felt. Rumi, the mystic poet of longing and union, said it simply: silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. And with this, he tore through the illusion that truth lives in eloquence. Words have beauty. They can dance, persuade, uplift, and console. But they are shadows, reflections on the wall of something infinitely more vast. You can describe a fire with all the words in the world, but none of them will warm your hands. You can define love in poetry, but it's not the same as trembling in its presence. The mind clings to concepts because it fears the unknown. It builds cathedrals of explanation, all to avoid the direct experience that cannot be grasped. But silence. Silence is not an absence. It is not void, nor blankness, nor neglect. Silence is presence, unfiltered. It is the fertile soil in which truth takes root. In silence, the masks fall. The stories we tell ourselves lose their hold, and what remains is raw, untamed, undeniable. Think of the moments in your life that truly changed you. Were they loud, or did they arrive like a breath, soft, still, and absolute? The birth of a child, the death of a loved one, a sudden realization under the stars. No one had to explain them to you. You didn't need language to know they were real. You were simply present. Silence does not argue, it does not convince, it does not entertain, but it reveals. It reveals what cannot be spoken, what cannot be reduced to sentences or syllables. Even the mind, with all its brilliance, is humbled in the face of this depth, because in silence you stop being a thinker and begin being. That is where the sacred lives. Not in beliefs, not in scriptures, not even in understanding, but in direct contact with what is. As long as we speak, we remain just outside the door, but in silence, the door opens inward, and we remember we've always been home. There is a stillness beneath all movement, a pause beneath every breath, a presence beneath every thought. This stillness is not something to achieve. It is already here, right now, beneath the noise of your mind. You don't need to create it. You need only to recognize it. The mistake we often make is believing that spiritual understanding comes from study, memorization, or effort. But the truth, the living truth, cannot be contained in techniques or philosophies, because it is not a thing. It is not separate from you. It is your own being, before you give it a name, before you wrap it in identity. That is why the masters speak in paradox. That is why Zen monks offer koans instead of explanations. They are trying to push you beyond the grip of the intellect to where silence begins. When a teacher says, "Don't seek the truth, just drop your opinions," it is not a trick, it's a compass. It's an invitation to surrender what is false and trust what is already shining underneath. But we are afraid of that simplicity. We think silence means emptiness. We fear that letting go will leave us with nothing. We cling to our stories because they feel like ground beneath our feet. Yet, the ground itself is an illusion. What supports you is not the narrative you hold, but the awareness that watches it all. Silence is that awareness, free of judgment, free of agenda. It listens without reacting. It accepts without distortion. It mirrors what is without needing to fix or name it. Have you ever sat with someone in complete silence and felt more understood than in hours of conversation? That is the power of presence. That is the language beyond words, the transmission of being to being, beyond the mind, beyond the filters, beyond the need to become anything. It's in the space between the words, in the breath between sentences, in the heart between thoughts. And this is not some distant ideal. You can touch it here, now, even as you listen. Feel the stillness under the words, not as a technique, but as a recognition. Let the words guide you back to where they came from. And when they dissolve, notice what remains. That still, sacred presence, your true nature, needs no explanation. It simply is. What is it that makes silence so uncomfortable for most people? It is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of themselves, raw, unfiltered, unedited. In silence, we are confronted with all that we usually drown out, our fears, our longing, our unresolved echoes. Yet this confrontation is a gift, because what you find in that space is not just noise or pain, you also find the doorway out. You see, silence is not just a lack of words, it is a fullness. It contains everything. It is pregnant with knowing that cannot be said. There's a reason why the greatest sages often paused before answering or never answered at all. Their silence wasn't emptiness, it was depth. It was presence, speaking without interference. Rumi calls silence the language of God, because it is not constructed by the mind. It is not subject to the ego's agenda. It doesn't try to convince, argue, or define. It simply reflects what is. When we live from that space, we begin to listen in a new way, not just to others, but to life itself. The rustle of leaves becomes a teaching. The wind on your skin becomes a reminder. The stillness of night becomes a sanctuary. And perhaps most importantly, we begin to hear ourselves. Not the voice we invented to survive, but the voice that has always been there. Soft, patient, true. That voice doesn't need a platform. It doesn't scream to be heard. It doesn't seek validation. It simply shines through your presence, like the moon shines through a still lake. The irony is that many search for enlightenment, as if it were a loud epiphany, a blinding revelation. But what if enlightenment is the moment you stop trying to be enlightened? What if the miracle is not the fireworks of awakening, but the quiet noticing of what already is? Silence teaches us that it doesn't give you more information. It unburdens you from it. It doesn't give you the answers you expect. It removes the questions that don't matter. In silence, the self begins to dissolve, not in a painful way, but in a peaceful return. Like a drop of rain returning to the ocean, like breath returning to breath. And in that merging, there is no effort, there is no concept, there is only being, and being needs no translation. As the noise of the world continues, the chatter of opinions, the whirlwind of information, the endless narration of the mind, we are called, ever so gently, back to the space where none of it is necessary. That space is silence, not the silence of suppression or fear, but the fertile, expansive silence that underlies all things. We are conditioned to believe that value comes from speaking, from acting, from knowing. But in truth, some of the most powerful moments in life happen without a single word. The embrace that says, "I see you." The tear that falls when there's nothing left to explain. The still gaze between two beings who understand each other. Beyond language, silence is where connection happens without interference, where love is not declared but revealed, where truth is not taught but remembered. Rumi's words point directly to this sacred reality, that beneath all our explanations, our philosophies, our interpretations of life and of God, there is only presence. And presence does not speak, it radiates. The mind, in its brilliance, can construct systems, create poetry, discover galaxies, but it cannot capture the essence of being, because being is not a concept. It is what remains when all concepts dissolve. It is what remains when the need to become fades, when we are no longer seeking to define, defend, or improve ourselves, when we are no longer trying to reach anything because we realize we were never separate from it. The silence Rumi speaks of is not the silence of monks in distant caves. It is the silence that lives in you, beneath your thoughts, beneath your name, beneath your identity. It is there right now, in this very moment. Perhaps that's why we fear it, because in it, all the masks must fall. But when they do, what's revealed is not lack, it's peace, it's clarity, it's truth so simple, it doesn't need decoration. It is the truth that listens without judging, loves without clinging, sees without comparing, exists without resisting. So the next time you feel lost, overwhelmed, fragmented, don't reach for more noise, reach for less. Return to the breath, the heartbeat, the pause. Return to what is always available, always patient, always whole. Return to silence, because silence, as Rumi reminds us, is not the absence of God. It is where God speaks most clearly. And when you learn to listen there, you realize that you were never alone, never broken, never separate. You were simply too loud to hear it. Now, in stillness, you can finally listen, and what you hear is everything.